She said I was born from her blood, called me her pride, her heart. But when I learned the truth, that blood felt like poison in my veins. Because I was just her biggest lie wrapped in love. From the moment I opened my eyes, she was my world. Her voice was the lullaby that rocked me to sleep. Her hands were the shelter I ran to when the world felt too loud. And her eyes. Those soft brown eyes always shimmered with love whenever they looked at me. I was her daughter. Her miracle baby. Born after years of longing, pain, and prayers. At least that's what she always said. I remember how she'd hold me close on stormy nights and whisper, "Tu Mary John Hai. Main tuje apni kun se palahai. You are my life. I've raised you with my own blood." I used to believe her. With everything I had. Because when the world outside turned cruel, she was the one constant in my chaos. School bullies, mean relatives, loneliness. I survived it all because I had her. My mother. My best friend. My safe place. My reason to smile. She used to call me her second heartbeat. And I would have bled for her. She told me stories of how difficult her pregnancy had been. How she almost lost her life during my birth. How she had held my tiny body against her chest and vowed never to let me go. I grew up carrying her pain like my inheritance. Every scar she hid behind her smile, I felt it as my own. When she cried in the kitchen after phone calls from relatives, I held her. When she stared too long at old photographs, I sat silently beside her, never asking questions. Because I loved her too much to dig into the pain she clearly wanted to bury. And in return, she loved me fiercely. Or so I thought. We didn't have much. Our home was small. Money was tight. But our little world was full of warmth, laughter, and secrets only we shared. Until I turned 18. That's when the first crack appeared. It was a summer evening, quiet and golden. I found an old box tucked away in the top of our storeroom cupboard. It was sealed with dusty tape, marked simply, "Not for her." I wasn't looking for trouble. I was just trying to find some old birthday decorations. But fate had other plans that day. I pulled it down, curious. And what I found inside that box began the slow death of the only love I had ever known. I wish I could forget what I saw inside that box. I wish I had never touched it. Never peeled back the layers of lies that had been so carefully hidden beneath dusty newspaper and time. But once truth cracks open, even a little, it never lets you sleep again. Inside were documents, letters, photographs, and a small hospital bracelet. At first, I didn't understand. The name printed on the bracelet wasn't mine, but the date matched my birthday. Exactly. The letters were written in a man's handwriting, desperate, messy, almost trembling. He wrote things like, "Please, don't do this. She deserves the truth one day. You promised I could be in her life when she turned 5. I named her Arya because it meant noble. It meant she was born from love, not shame." I read them all with trembling hands. My mind wanted to reject it, to scream lies. But my heart, it already knew. Somewhere inside me, it had always known. These weren't letters from a stranger. They were from a man who once loved my mother. A man who was my biological father. And the more I read, the more the pieces began to fall into place. Mom never talked about my father. Always brushed off questions with vague sadness. Said he died before I was born. Said it hurt too much to talk about him. But these letters? They were dated years after my birth. He had been alive. He had wanted me. And she had shut him out. Why? Why would she lie about something so deep, so sacred? I felt my hands shaking, my heartbeat turning erratic. The walls of the only home I had ever known suddenly felt unfamiliar. Cold, hiding secrets in every corner. And then I found the photograph. It was of her. Younger. Smiling. Eyes full of light. And standing beside her, his arms around her, was the man from the letters. He looked like me. His eyes. His nose. Even the curve of his smile. I had spent 18 years wondering why I didn't look like anyone in our family. Now I knew. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of the storeroom, my back against the wall, the box of truth wide open beside me like a coffin I didn't know I crawled into. When the sun rose, I went to her. My mother. My protector. The woman who said I was her pride, her heart. I held the photograph out. My voice was barely a whisper. Who is he? And the way she looked at me. For a second, just a second, I saw fear in her eyes. Not sadness. Not confusion. But fear. That's when I knew. This wasn't a forgotten memory. This was a secret she had buried alive. And now, it was clawing its way out. She stared at the photograph in my hand for what felt like forever. Her lips parted, then closed again, like a lie was sitting on the edge of her tongue, rehearsed, waiting to be spoken. But I wasn't a child anymore. And she knew it. Where did you find this? She finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The box was in the hallway, open like a wound. I asked you a question, I said louder this time. My voice cracked, but not with weakness. With something deeper. Something colder. Her shoulders slumped. And then, just like that, she began to confess. She told me his name, Adarsh. They had fallen in love in college. It was intense. Reckless. The kind of love that burns too hot and too fast. He had wanted to marry her. But she came from a conservative family. They didn't approve. Worse, he was already engaged, forced by his family into an arranged marriage. She said she broke it off. Cut all ties. Until weeks later, she found out she was pregnant. I stood frozen. Half of me wanted to scream at her for hiding this from me. The other half wanted to hold her, protect her from whatever pain had made her carry this secret alone for 18 years. But the next thing she said shattered the ground beneath my feet. I was going to give you away. I blinked. She looked down at her trembling hands. I was scared, Arya. Alone. No money. No husband. My parents wanted me to abort you or disappear. So I made a deal with a couple in Delhi. They were ready to adopt you as soon as you were born. I couldn't breathe. I had almost been sold. And then what happened? I asked, voice barely holding together. Her next words landed like a bullet. But when I saw you, I couldn't do it. I backed out, took you and ran. I left everything behind. She said it like she expected me to be grateful. But all I felt was hollow. You told me he was dead. She looked at me then, eyes red. Because he was, Arya. To me, he was dead the day he walked away and didn't fight for us. But he did, I whispered. The letters. The calls. He begged to be in my life. Silence. Thick. Deafening. I did what I had to do, she said finally. I protected you from a man who already had a family. Who chose them over us. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see my mother. I saw a woman. A liar. A thief. She had stolen not just a man from my life, she had stolen my identity, my roots, my right to know where I came from. She had twisted her protection into possession. Her love into a cage. And the worst part? She didn't even look sorry. I deserve to know who I am, I said through clenched teeth. No, she said sharply. You deserve peace. And I won't let you destroy that chasing a ghost. A ghost? He wasn't a ghost. He was my father. And that night, I made a decision that changed everything. I was going to find him. With or without her, I left the next morning. No goodbye. No explanation. Just a note on the kitchen table that read, if he was a ghost, I need to see him for myself. I had nothing more to say to her. She had built my entire life on half-truths and motherly control disguised as protection. But now, I needed to breathe in air she hadn't filtered. All I had was a name, Adarsh Mehra, and a few old addresses from the letters. They were over a decade old, but it was a start. I boarded a bus to Delhi, where my story had almost ended before it began. The city was chaotic, loud, unfamiliar. But somehow, I felt like I was standing closer to something real than I ever had before. For days, I searched, rang doorbells, asked around, faced shut doors and suspicious eyes. I slept in cheap hostels, skipped meals, and clung to fading hope. Then, one afternoon, a retired postman recognized the name. Adarsh Mehra used to live here years ago. Worked in publishing, I think. Moved to Gurgaon after his wife died. His wife. The one he had been engaged to while my mother was pregnant with me. I didn't know what I expected to feel. Anger, maybe? But all I felt was a strange emptiness. Did he love her? Did he think of me? I found his workplace first, a publishing house nestled on a quiet corner. An older receptionist confirmed it. Yes, Mr. Mehra still works here. He's the editor-in-chief now. I froze. After 18 years of being told he was dead, here he was, living, breathing, editing manuscripts while I grew up wondering who I looked like. I waited outside until he came out, and when I saw him, everything inside me stilled. He looked exactly like the photograph. The same thoughtful eyes, the same tired smile, the same air of quiet sorrow. He walked past me, and I did nothing. My feet were glued to the ground. My heart was thundering. My voice had disappeared. So I followed him, from a distance, to a modest home in a gated colony, where two young girls ran out to greet him, calling him Papa. I froze again. He had children, a life, a world where I didn't exist. I walked away before I could break down. That night, I sat alone on a park bench, tears streaming down my face. Maybe Mom was right. Maybe it was better not knowing. Because now that I did, I didn't know what to do with this pain, this jealousy, this rage. But just when I thought I couldn't hurt more, a voice behind me said, "You've been following me. Who are you?" I turned around, and there he was, Adarsh Mehra, my father, looking at me with confusion, concern, and something else. Recognition. It was like looking in a mirror, older, weathered, but undeniably mine. I stood up, my voice trembling. "I think I'm your daughter." He didn't say a word, not for the longest time. And then, he sank onto the bench, like the weight of my words had shattered his bones. For the first few minutes, he didn't speak. He just stared at me, like I was some ghost pulled from a past he had tried to bury. "I always wondered," he finally whispered. "I always hoped." He looked away, blinking fast. Then he said it. The words I had needed to hear my whole life. "I never stopped looking for you, Arya." My breath caught in my throat. "You knew my name?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "I did. She told me once. During one of our last phone calls before she disappeared completely." My chest burned with a strange mixture of anger and heartbreak. "She told me you were dead," I said. "She made sure you were erased from my life." His eyes filled with pain. "I begged her to let me be in your life. I wasn't perfect, but I never stopped trying. Letters, emails. I even went to her house once. Her father nearly threw me down the stairs." I could see the hurt in his face. Years of regret living behind his eyes. "She was scared," he continued. "Scared of losing everything. And she thought keeping you to herself was the only way to protect you. But she didn't protect you, did she?" "No," I whispered. "She lied." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "And I let her. Because I thought one day, you'd come find me. Or she'd let you." The silence between us was heavy, but not empty. It was filled with words neither of us had the strength to say. "Those girls?" I asked. "Your daughters?" He smiled faintly. "Yes, my daughters. But you were my first. The one I never got to hold. The one I dreamed of." And just like that, I broke. I cried like I hadn't cried in years. For the birthdays he missed. The scraped knees he didn't bandage. The report cards he never saw. And he held me. Not like a stranger, not like a forgotten mistake, but like a father, grasping the piece of his soul he'd been missing for 18 years. We talked for hours. He told me about his life after my mother left. The guilt, the sleepless nights, the way he never gave up, even when everyone told him to. He had kept all the letters returned unopened. He even had the picture she sent him, the same one I'd found. You have her eyes, he said. But your fire, that's mine. It felt surreal. Like I had stepped into the life I was always meant to have. And for a moment, just a brief one, I let myself feel something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. But fate wasn't done playing its game yet. Because 2 days later, my mother showed up. She stormed into the publishing office like a hurricane with eyes made of fire. Security couldn't stop her. Receptionists couldn't slow her. She saw me sitting in the waiting area and froze. Then her eyes darted to the door behind me. His office. You found him, she whispered, more accusation than realization. I stood up slowly, meeting her stare head-on. You lied to me my whole life, I said quietly. Told me he was dead. And all this time, he was alive, writing to me, begging to be part of my life. Her jaw clenched. He was a mistake, Arya. I did what I had to. No, I snapped. You did what you wanted. You made that choice for me. She turned cold, mechanical. I saved you from a man who abandoned you before you were even born. He didn't abandon me, a voice said from behind me. My father. He stepped into view, calm but firm. You pushed me away. You vanished, Devika. You changed cities, blocked numbers, forged lies. She looked between us, her voice trembling now. You think he would have raised you? He was still engaged to someone else when I told him about you. He would have made you a secret, Arya. I would have fought, he interrupted. I would have ended that engagement. And I did. You know I did. Her silence said everything. You just didn't want to share her, he added. You wanted to be her everything, even if that meant cutting her in half. Tears spilled from her eyes, but there was no innocence in them, just desperation. I gave you everything, she said to me. I raised you alone. I loved you harder than anyone else could. And this is how you repay me? By choosing him? It wasn't just sadness in her voice, it was control. The way people speak when they think they own you. I'm not choosing him over you, I said. I'm choosing the truth. Something you've denied me my whole life. She stepped forward, her voice lowering to a venomous whisper. You're still my daughter. And I said the words I never thought I'd have the strength to say. No. I'm your hostage. Or at least, I was. That broke her. She slapped me. Right there, in front of my father. In front of the staff. But I didn't flinch. Because for the first time, I wasn't scared of her. My father stepped between us instantly. If you touch her again, I will make sure you regret it in every courtroom in this city, he said, his voice low, sharp, final. My mother didn't reply. She just stood there, broken, stunned, trembling, not from fear, but from losing control. And then, without another word, she turned and walked out. But as she paused at the door, she looked over her shoulder and said something that haunted me for weeks. You think this is over, Arya? I may have lied. But what's coming will make you wish I'd stayed your only truth. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid of her, but because I knew her. My mother wasn't the kind of woman who walked away defeated. She didn't lose battles. She burned the battlefield down instead. And sure enough, she started her war. Within a week, she filed a case against my father. Defamation. Harassment. Attempt to manipulate a minor. Even though I was legally an adult, she claimed parental mental abuse. She dragged his name through the media, leaked private photos, and fed old, distorted stories to the press. The man I had only just begun to know was suddenly painted as a predator. And the worst part? She used me. She released childhood pictures of me with captions like, I raised her alone while he disappeared. Now he wants credit for the child I built from scratch. I couldn't believe it. But I should have. Because this wasn't about love or truth anymore. This was about possession. She had lost control over me, and now, she'd rather destroy my life than let anyone else be a part of it. I stood beside my father in court, not because I was trying to choose between them, but because the truth needed a witness. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement, I looked straight at my mother and said, "She raised me with lies. Told me he was dead. Told me I didn't need to know where I came from. But I do. And I deserve to." No one has the right to bury someone's truth just because it's inconvenient. My mother's eyes didn't blink. She didn't flinch. But I saw something in her I'd never seen before. Fear. Not of the courtroom. Not of the law. But of me. Because I wasn't hers to shape anymore. I was no longer the daughter who begged for love. I was the truth she could no longer silence. The case collapsed quickly. Her accusations had no evidence. And the judge warned her, next time, she'd be the one on trial. But still, she had one more move. She showed up at my father's house days later, dressed in white like a widow of her own lies. She handed me an envelope and said, "Read this when you're ready. Just know, I never stopped loving you, even when I broke you." Then she walked away. I didn't open the letter that day. Not that week. Not even the week after. Because sometimes, silence is the only language left between a mother and daughter who once held each other like home, only to discover they were each other's ruins. But I wasn't done. Because if she thought the past could only burn me, she hadn't yet seen how I'd learned to set her world on fire. I stared at that envelope for weeks. Some nights I wanted to burn it. Other nights, I wanted to open it just to see if there was a trace of the mother I once loved. But I didn't do either. Instead, I wrote my own letter. But it wasn't for her. It was for every girl who had ever been told a lie so big it stole her identity. Every child who was used as a shield for their parents' secrets. Every person who'd been broken by the ones who claimed they were protecting them. I turned my story into a book. I wrote the truth, raw, unfiltered, and damning. I wrote about the woman who raised me with affection laced in manipulation. The woman who kissed my forehead at night while burying every part of who I really was. I wrote about the father who was painted a villain, but turned out to be the only person who had ever fought for me when I didn't even know I existed in someone else's battle. And then, I published it. Under my real name. Arya Devdutt. Yes, I took his name. The world read it. They wept with me. They bled with me. And my mother? She drowned in it. Because when you raise someone on lies, you forget they might one day grow into the truth and use it like a blade. Her reputation as a respected single mother? Shattered. She tried to sue me, but every word I'd written was backed with documents, photos, letters, and courtroom transcripts. She couldn't deny it anymore. She became the villain in a story that was never hers to write. And me? I didn't just find my father. I found myself. For the first time, I breathed without guilt, loved without fear, and lived without pretending I didn't ache inside. I moved in with my father for a while, got to know my sisters, built something real, not based on secrets, not forged in control. And that envelope? One day, I buried it under a banyan tree behind his house. Not because I forgave her, but because I didn't need her words to know who I was anymore. She gave birth to me, but she didn't get to define me. She didn't get to own my story anymore. I did, because in the end, she said I was born from her blood, called me her pride, her heart. But when I learned the truth, that blood felt like poison in my veins. Because I was just her biggest lie wrapped in love. And now, that lie lives in the light of my truth, where it will burn forever.